We're going to be in Daniel chapter 5. Daniel chapter 5. This is another one of those stories that we're familiar with from Daniel. This one, and then again in 6, where we'll get to the lion's den. These are the ones that we remember from when we were kids. This one doesn't translate quite as well to children's Bible studies because it's a little bit more of a conquering adult. It's not an adult theme, but it translates easier to adults understanding what's going on. Chapter 5, verse 1, King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for thousands of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that his kings and his nobles, his wives and his concubines could drink from them. All right, let's stop right there and kind of identify who this Belshazzar is. When you see the ones that his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, don't think father in terms of he was the direct next in line descendant of Nebuchadnezzar. He was several kings later. He was actually the son of Nabonidus. You remember us talking about Nabonidus writing the letter about how he had been sick for 7 years and that he had turned himself over to God and that he had been healed. It was very similar to the biblical account that we have of Nebuchadnezzar going crazy for 7 years. So some scholars think that what we're looking at in Daniel is Nabonidus's reign getting attributed to Nebuchadnezzar in some places. So Nebuchadnezzar was a few generations ahead of Nabonidus, and Nabonidus decided at a point late in his career that he didn't want to be active in governing, so he put Belshazzar, his son, in charge of the armies and in charge of the throne. And he went on walkabout. The guy just, made himself scarce, was not as involved in affairs of state during that time. It's possible that that's during that 7-year period that he was absent, but as far as this account is concerned, there would have been no chance for him to come back. Right? So if Nabonidus was out for 7 years and then came back to his old kingdom, that could not have happened in this case because the kingdom's not theirs anymore at the end of this. They're using the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple. This might have been during the attack in 587, or more likely it was tribute. When the last few kings of Jerusalem were in power, they were paying constant tribute. And some of the tribute that they were sending was coming out of the temple. You can go all the way back to King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah was taking stuff out of the temple because there was so much gold and silver there, and they were sending that to these foreign kings who were threatening to come and lay siege, and they knew they couldn't take them. So the kings of Jerusalem, the kings of Israel, would just send them gifts to appease them. So that's probably why they have these. They were probably being kept in this large complex dedicated to Marduk. Marduk was their chief deity, and if I've got it straight, there was the royal palace, and then next door to the royal palace was this giant complex. One of the authors said that it was a little bit like, say, Smithsonian, right? Just lots of different chambers, lots and lots of artifacts, all kinds of things that they had either conquered somebody and brought back or had been given to them in tribute, but anyway, full of these things. And then toward the back of that facility was the temple area where Marduk and his consort goddess were kept. So all of this was in honor of Marduk. So when Nebuchadnezzar got the stuff from the temple in Jerusalem, it would make sense that he would have put it in Marduk's big complex with all the rest of the stuff that they had gotten. And one of the authors mentioned, imagine if you're Daniel and you've been taken from Jerusalem and you're walking the streets. Now you're working for the government in Babylon, and you're walking back and forth past Marduk's temple, and you know that inside Marduk's temple is the gold from the temple at Jerusalem, what it must have been like for those captives. There's a passage, and I don't remember where it is, but I want to say probably in Lamentations, where the people of Israel are being asked by their hosts, by the people that have conquered them in Babylon, sing us a song, teach us about the music of your country. And they said, how in the world can we sing when we're slaves in a foreign land? Said, we hung our harps on the hedgerow, and there was nothing that we could sing about. So these people knew that they were a defeated people. Bits and pieces of their past were on display in Marduk's big complex and temple. Go one more door down, or just down the river a little bit, and there was a giant ziggurat. I think it was 7 stories high. And on the very top of the ziggurat was a monument to Marduk. So from wherever you were in that area, you could look up and you could see Marduk up there on top. So that's the situation in which they find themselves. Well, now Belshazzar comes into power, and he wants to throw a party for his nobles and for the people that are working in his government. And again, you have to ask the question, where is Daniel? Daniel's not at the party. He's not part of this. Got to looking at how old he might have been by this time, and that may be the answer. He was probably somewhere above 70 anyway. May have been retired, may not have been working regularly in affairs of state anymore. We don't know. We just know that when Belshazzar threw this party, Daniel didn't get his invitation. They brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of silver and of bronze, of iron and wood and stone. So we have a repeated theme all throughout Daniel. God blesses them, things go well, and they worship idols. So Nebuchadnezzar, God did great things for him, and then he builds this giant statue of Marduk. God does nice things for him. He gets so full of himself that he's no longer capable of giving God credit. God sends him out into, to graze like a donkey for 7 years. So God keeps putting his stamp on things, but the rulers of Babylon are not listening very well. Verse 5, suddenly the finger of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale. He was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. I like the way the NIV translates that. His knees were knocking. There is a human hand that shows up, and I've always envisioned that this human hand was not human hand size, but like great big. This looks like a human hand, but it's giant, and everybody sees it. And it begins to write on the plaster of the wall. That tells you a little bit about the construction of the palace. It was made mainly with burnt brick and then overlaid. Right? So they've built this large edifice and then overlaid it with plaster, and the hand shows up and starts inscribing on the plaster wall, and Belshazzar has the correct response. It scares him to death. The hand didn't have an invitation to the party either. It just shows up. So here's the question. Whose hand is it? Okay, maybe the Holy Spirit. Some people go back to theophany again, and they say, well, it's the hand of Jesus, years and years in advance. Go down to verse 24. Therefore, God, that is, or he, that is God, sent the hand that wrote the inscription. So we can't really say God did it because God sent it. We might go with the Holy Spirit. I think that would be the only time that the Holy Spirit appeared as a hand. Our real answer is we don't know. It may not be anybody's hand. It's just a hand that shows up and begins to write on the wall. Its mission was not to be identified. Its mission was to write something on the wall. And so, verse 7, the king summoned the enchanters, the astrologers, and the diviners. You know, so there's a shorter list in this chapter. You remember when Nebuchadnezzar called them, and it was like a paragraph of different names for all those folks. He said to those wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Who was the second highest ruler in the kingdom? Well, 50 years ago, it was Daniel, but don't know who's in that position at this time. Again, this king does not seem to have any idea who Daniel is or what Daniel is capable of doing. But this is the regular response that these kings had. When they had a vision, call all the wise guys, call all the diviners, and see if one of them can tell you what's going on. Again, this time, not only is he able to tell them, here's the vision I saw. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar starts with, I'm not going to tell you the vision. You have to tell me the vision and the interpretation. The next time we have, I'll tell you the vision, you tell me the interpretation. Here, we actually have visual aids. You can walk in and see the handwriting on the wall. Right? When the finger doesn't write and then erase, the finger writes and leaves it on the wall. So he calls for his wise men to come and says, hey, read that and tell me what it means. But the rest of the story is the same, right? None of them can do it. They don't have any idea what the writings mean. When all the wise men came in, they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. May the king live forever, she said. Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. It was in the time of his father, and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belshazzar, has found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. So the Queen Mother shows up. We don't know a whole lot, or at least I don't know a whole lot, about the Queen Mothers of Babylon, but it was a fairly common thing in the ancient Near East for the king to be either considered too holy to be involved with affairs of state or to just be too busy. And so they would appoint the Queen Mother to be in charge of those kind of things. So she'd take care of the day-to-day. And then the king would do what the king wanted to do, like throw a big banquet and not invite his mother. So he's doing all the stuff that he does. Mom shows up and says, don't worry about it. And again, she calls Nebuchadnezzar his father, right? When your father Nebuchadnezzar was king. Probably, again, talking about your ancestor, not your immediate father. Some of the scholars think that maybe the Queen Mother was the path of descent from Nebuchadnezzar, that she was a daughter of the king, and that maybe she was involved somehow in knowing Daniel back in the day. Again, we don't really know, but she's the one who knows. She has information and knows how to get him in touch with Daniel. I always try to mention this because I think it's really interesting. When Philip met the eunuch is introduced as a man who was a keeper of money, a bookkeeper in the service of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians. Well, the Ethiopians believed that their king was the son of the sun god. So he was way too holy to be dealing with human affairs. So Candace was a royal lineage of queen mothers, and the queen mothers would take care of the affairs of state. So this eunuch worked for the queen mother, and probably one of the reasons he was a eunuch was that he worked for the mother of the queen, or the mother of the king. So he's traveling back from Jerusalem. Philip finds him, teaches him the truth, and sends him back. So at least within the next week or two, after Philip teaches the eunuch, the queen mother, the de facto ruler of Ethiopia, knows where he's been and what he's learned. The Ethiopians had a very strong form of Christianity very early. So it's at least possible that that Ethiopian eunuch and the queen mother may have had something to do with that. How old was Daniel at this point? I tried to do math, and I apologize for that. But he was taken into Babylon in about 605 BC. He's described as being a young man. So between 605 and when Cyrus comes in just this very day and conquers them, that happened in 539. So about 66 years have gone by, which is really important when we talk about the lion's den next week. How old was Daniel when they chuck him in the lion's den? I've always had in my mind this young guy, fairly along in years. He was a very mature individual when they put him in the lion's den. All right. So he calls Daniel in and he says, if you can read this writing and tell me what it means, then you'll be clothed in purple, have a gold chain around your neck, and you'll be made the third highest ruler over the kingdom. And Daniel says, keep your gifts. I don't need them. Give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. All right, so again, we've got a permanent inscription on the wall of the palace. And Daniel reads it for the king. Your Majesty, the Most High God, gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and people of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. Those he wanted to humble, he humbled. When his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like an ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and sets over them anyone he wishes. Okay, that's the preamble. Has he told us what it means yet? No, but they invited Daniel to the palace and said, Daniel, can you tell us what it means? And Daniel says, yeah, I can tell you what it means. But first, a word from our sponsor. And so he tells them what they need to hear before he begins to tell Belshazzar about what the inscription actually means. You, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You've gotten the goblets from his temple brought to you and to your nobles and your wives and your concubines, and you drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and your ways. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is the inscription that was written. Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Okay. Some of the older translations have Upharsin. Depends on how you handle the fricative there. Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. Here's what the words mean. Mene means God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end. Right? He's not bringing it to an end. He has brought it to an end. Right? So this is not get your house in order. You got a few weeks left. Next year about this time, none of that. This is your reign has been brought to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the scales and found wanting. It's already been judged. Right? We're not here for a court-martial. We're not here for a hearing. I'm here to tell you that you've already been weighed in the balance and you've been found wanting. And Peres, which is kind of interesting, in the inscription we get Parsin. When we get down to 28, we get the alternative, which is Peres. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So everything that you need to know written on that wall, now you know. Darius the Mede is going to be made king in his place at the conquering power of Cyrus. So some historians have that Cyrus becomes king at this point. Some ancient documents have this guy Darius coming in and serving for a while, and then the kingdom turns over. But bottom line for Belshazzar is, you're not the king anymore. Your kingdom is being taken from you. At Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. How long did his place of prominence last? Oh, just a couple hours. It was already about that time. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was killed, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. So the Medo-Persians have been very strong for a long time. Evidently, what's happening out in the field while he's seeing this handwriting on the wall is that Cyrus and his army, which is a combined army of the Medes and the Persians, has attacked the standing army of the Babylonians and wiped them out. There was no contest. There was a nearby town that was very large and well fortified. The people of that town opened up the gates and just said, y'all come on in. They didn't even throw a punch. And so they went in, they conquered, they took whatever they were going to take, and then they moved on to the capital city. When they got to the capital city, the river was diverted, and because the river was diverted, they basically just marched in the front door, and nobody in Babylon could do anything about them either. So it was kind of a bloodless coup. Obviously, the king gets killed, but as far as armies clashing or having to lay siege for months and months to break down the barriers in Babylon, not so much. So Daniel says, you've been weighed in the balance and found wanting, and God's taken your kingdom away from you and giving it to the Medes and Persians. And they showed up that very night and deposed him of his kingdom. Now, Daniel will continue to be used by the Medes and Persians. So he's not finished. He's going to have more opportunities, but the government changes. His ability politically and his ability spiritually just keeps shining. So ever how old he is, people recognize that he has a good thing going on. Let me tell you a little bit about some of the excavations at Babylon I was reading about. Nebuchadnezzar's dad built a very nice palace, but it was too close to the Euphrates River. It was built with this blackened burnt brick, but the foundation eroded whenever the river would come up, and so it wasn't very viable. So when Nebuchadnezzar came in to build his palace, this is from Biblical Archaeology Review. Robert Coldaway started a large-scale excavation at Babylon in 1899, and he worked there for 18 years. And he uncovered very large parts of the city, including the palace. And in accordance with Nebuchadnezzar's inscription, which it had a picture in the magazine of the inscription, Coldaway unearthed a burnt brick foundation on the western part of the palace wall, which Nebuchadnezzar used for the foundations for his own palace. The main southern palace was trapezoidal in shape and constructed around 5 large courtyards. The excavators discovered a series of vaulted rooms in the northeastern corner, and originally they thought they had found the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon, but it ended up being a bunch of storage rooms. In 1987, Saddam Hussein ordered the palace to be rebuilt, covering up all of the stuff that Nebuchadnezzar and other kings of his era had done, and it was dubbed Disney for a Despot. He just went in there and just made it modern and beautiful to his taste anyway. The new palace was built over the top of the ancient one out of bricks inscribed with his name, that is Saddam Hussein's name, alongside the name of Nebuchadnezzar. So when Saddam is, loud and proud and in power, he rebuilds Nebuchadnezzar's palace with bricks that he has made so that his name and Nebuchadnezzar's name are side by side. What does that tell you? He saw himself as the rebirth of the ancient Babylonian Empire. Now, if you go to reading in Revelation, and the bad guys are always Babylonians, so nobody talks much about Saddam anymore. How long has Saddam been dead?
20 years.
Over 20 years, right? So he's kind of fallen out of favor as far as possible antichrists are concerned. Been gone a long time. I saw a series of pictures of U.S. and I'm going to say Marines. I don't know if it was the Marines or an Army group that went in and kind of captured that palace, and they showed pictures of them holding stacks of U.S. currency, $100 bills, just big stacks of them. You know what I'm talking about? And I was just amazed at the wealth and the opulence that the guy had amassed for himself in his palace, so that he could be kind of the new Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. But again, he's been gone a long time. That area of the country, of the world, is not beautiful to me. I mean, it's desert and not very attractive to my way of thinking. But a great deal of important stuff in the history of the world has happened in that little piece of property, right? Around Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. There's just a lot of human history that's all packed into the sand around that place. So this is Daniel, 500 and something BC, in that place as history was unfolding and a new kingdom was taking over the old kingdom. And at that point, at least, history was going on.